Good afternoon, everyone, and a big welcome to our series of primers on sustainability. Why is CGM conducting this learning program? Well, firstly, we are in a climate emergency, and this means everyone needs to play their part to reduce the impacts of this crisis, right down to the smallest organization and to every individual. Second, sustainability will become a license to operate. Companies who do not demonstrate efforts to become sustainable will gradually be excluded from the supply chain. Sustainable companies will have easier and cheaper access to finance, customers will want their products, and they will find it easier to attract and retain good talent. Thirdly, we recognize that some smaller organizations may not have dedicated resources to work on a sustainability plan. CGM, together with our partners, wanted to make this learning program widely available so that we can mobilize people and organizations en masse. Many people think it will cost a lot and take too long to invest in becoming sustainable. Well, in this series, the facilitators will show you how you can take the first steps through some easy, low-cost options that you can implement immediately and achieve savings within a short period. This program is made up of 7 sessions and will run over the next 2 months. We kick off today with an overview of sustainability, why it is important that we all take action now. From Sime Darby Property, listen as Razif and Sharif will introduce you to a sustainability toolkit, which you can use to help you manage your sustainability plan. The next 4 weeks will be on water, waste, and energy. And use the toolkit again to capture the key takeaways from each lesson and to start formulating your activation plan. And after Raya, we will close out this series with 2 interactive coaching sessions where you can get guidance from your facilitators as you develop and implement your plan. We are so pleased to see the wide range of participants who have registered, from those totally new to sustainability to experienced practitioners. And a big thank you to Affin Bank, Carlsberg, Dutch Lady, Eurocham, Heineken, HSBC Malaysia, MESCO, Malaysia GVC, MPIA, the Green Factory, Sime Darby Property, and YTL who are supporting these primers. Thank you so much. At this point, let me now introduce you to Khoo Hsu Chuang, who will be your moderator for today. Everyone in the business world and outside it knows who Chuang is. But today, don't worry, it is Mr. Nice Guy who is joining us, not the interviewer who turns up the heat on BFM's Morning Grill. He is the founder of Do More, and he is actually a financial journalist with over 2 decades of experience in KL, Singapore, Tokyo, Hong Kong, London, covering the financial and capital markets for The Edge, Bloomberg, and Thomson Reuters. I'm so pleased to hand you over to Khoo Hsu Chuang. Over to you.
Well, thank you, Datin. Very nice words from you. And of course, everybody's looking forward to the session. We do have a range, very diverse range of participants, as you were mentioning, Datin. Thank you all so much for sharing your valuable time with us. A lot of work has gone into what will be, I'm sure, a valuable learning lesson for all of us. And I'm sure the more knowledgeable among you will also wade in to help with the less knowledgeable and the newer participants on this important journey. So as Datin was mentioning, today's session will attempt to provide us with an overview of what sustainability is and what we need to know to act now, including providing some tools to help us on this journey. Today's session is a 101, a primer, which will set an important context for all of us for the weeks ahead. And as we know, there's going to be sessions on waste management, energy efficiency, water management, and renewable energy. So without further ado, may I introduce Razif Yusoff. He's the head of sustainability and safety at Sime Darby Property, and of course joined by Sharif James, head of group corporate sustainability, both of course of Sime Darby Property. So over to you, gentlemen.
Okay, so I'm really looking forward to sharing with you for the next 1.5 hours, and we would like to have a dialogue for the last half hour with all of you. To bring you through on how you can start your sustainability journey. I will share with you about 25 minutes on the why, and then my colleague Sharif will then share a bit more detail on how we can start. And then at the end of it, we are pleased to share the tool that we have been using in Sime Darby Property that you can download and you can immediately start using the carbon tool. A bit of selling for on behalf of CGM. This is a series of 7 sessions where 5 are teaching sessions or learning sessions, starting with us today on the why and the tool for you to get started on the journey. So the tool is not only for SMEs, which are the majority of those who are registered for these sessions, but also can be used for medium and large enterprises. There'll be 4 learning sessions: waste, energy efficiency, water resources, and renewable energy. And I'm very proud to be the first to go through Sustainability 101, and myself and Sharif in the next 1.5 hours. I'm going to share the first bullet point, which is what it's all about, a little bit on the why. There'll be 2 or 3 slides which are very familiar, but I would like to reintroduce them to make sure that, that the story is clear, where our thinking come from. Sharif will then go into a bit more of the technical or what you can do technically in order for you to start your sustainability journey, including the tools that we have modified slightly to make it easier for others to use on carbon, waste, recycling, and water, and a bit of homework for you at the end of it. For a practitioner like me, we do differentiate between the term sustainability or sustainable development and ESG. But as we go into conversation, they are used interchangeably. You know, sometimes we use sustainability, actually want to mean ESG, the same the other way around. For me, in simple terms, when we talk about sustainability or sustainable development, it's about what any development that you do today, you don't compromise the people of the future to develop and meet their future needs. And in ESG, it's a bit more structured. It is a set of criteria and standards on how company operate within the environmental, social, and governance space. Um, I think Datin Sri Sunita mentioned earlier around if around companies or especially SMEs or any company, sorry, that practice a lot more ESG and sustainability initiatives tend to get better financing from banks and institutions. Investors, for example, large company like us, investors also want to look is the company is serious in its ESG initiatives. Generally, what E means or environmental mean is how you manage nature, being the steward for it. The social piece is the relationship between your own employees, then you've got suppliers, customers, external stakeholders, authorities, etc. And G is around how you control. You look at the board composition, executive pay, and anti-bribery and corruption. So I hope that gives us a bit of alignment as we go through the 4 modules, what ESG entail. All of us, I won't be surprised in one way or another, some more involved than others on UN SDG, United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. It is a set of 17 goals that United Nations has set by 2030. Just giving you a few of the examples in there: climate action, for example, life on land, are some of the goals that are in the UN SDG. For us as a company, we look at the 17 goals and we translate that to our own goals. And in our case, we have 18 sustainable goals for Sime Darby Property. You would also have heard of the Paris Agreement, which philosophically, or the target is by 2100 at the end of the century. If you look at the green text on the left-hand side, it's about keeping the global temperature maximum 2 degrees Celsius and below, but work very, very hard to us and limit the temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. So in 2015, under the Paris Agreement, 196 countries signed and agreed to the statement and ambition. So the last two slides around UNSDG and Paris Agreement. Granted, and many of us have heard about it, and now going down to the supply chain. What I am starting to see is, and I wouldn't be surprised in the coming years, the clients will continue to increase their expectations on partnering with those in the supply chain who are committed to ESG. And commitment is not just leaving it on a piece of paper. They have to show evidences that that they are taking actions in terms of E, S, and G. Or climate change actions seems to dominate the agenda of large companies, and currently more and more companies seems to be starting to understand the role of supply chain in terms of overall emissions. So when we say emissions, from our lens as a company, we look at what do we release. So if you look at the two icons on the left-hand side, scope 1 and scope 2, are the release of greenhouse gases, which are toxic gases, into the atmosphere. Where it is more of a concern is on the right-hand side, which I have put a red box around it called scope 3. These are emissions coming out from our supply chain. And more research are coming back saying that the emissions of any company, highly likely 80 to 90% comes from their supply chain. So this is something that we take seriously. Increasingly, we are looking at suppliers. We also have construction contractors who practice ESG. And in a way, they get into our good books. It could be in early conversation, we are having early conversation, for example, will ESG be a selection criteria in the future? So all in all, echoing what Datin Sri Sunita mentioned earlier, the earlier you start your journey, it will only benefit you in the future. Oh, sorry. So this, in this slide, I would like to share with you what will we cover in the series of starting your sustainability journey, and what is out of scope. On the left-hand side is what's included, and on the right-hand side, what's not for this series for now. One is around reducing your carbon footprint, be it in transport, construction, manufacturing, or in the production of your materials, or in the raw materials that you use. Second, we will be looking at electricity, energy. We'll be looking at recycling. Generally, you will be looking at, you do not want to pollute, and how do you know to measure the pollution that you do, and water, which will be covered in one of those modules. You will receive basic tools to manage your ESG so that you can be very clear about your carbon footprint. As sustainability is a very wide topic, these are those that will not be covered in the Starting Your Sustainability Journey series around health and safety, human rights, especially the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights, then on governance issues, and also I specifically colored biodiversity in blue to show that Just to raise the point that biodiversity is getting increasing attention, and in the coming years there will be more biodiversity efforts or expectation, and watch this space, and hence I colored it blue. So while you are doing the basic things in terms of your carbon, getting your carbon footprint right, understanding your carbon footprint, and once you understand, then you sort of know what needs to be done. While you are looking at this basic carbon footprint build-up, make sure that your other eye is also paying attention to emerging technologies. There are so many emerging technologies that I keep reading week in and week out. And also, there are also technologies that has been around for some time, but for one reason or another, it is not yet widely adopted. The question that you need to bring into your company, individual companies, then is, can those emerging technology or green technology that's already there but some or other not being used, can those be opportunities for you to make a difference in the competing in the supply chain? So if you look at the left hand side, the little boxes, the starting point is always about the right mindset in the company, and that has to start from the top. As you go around, those are the opportunities you can look at, whether greening the office, be involved in green building, look at your products, look at your production processes. As I mentioned earlier, is there opportunity in biodiversity? A lot of people are still learning in this space. Green energy, and also the last one with those aeroplanes, about how you transport your products, the logistic behind it, and how you package your products, and the vehicle that you use. So there are many opportunities for you to look at. My encouragement is build the basics first, as in this sustainability journey series, but do not let your eyes go of all the emerging technology that's coming through, which can be only a plus side opportunity for you to thrive. The statement on the right-hand side, we have significant trading relations with EU. It's not from Razif, it's from Bursa. So Malaysia has significant trading relationships with EU. So if your company is involved in exporting to European Union, CBAM will come into effect, Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. By 2026, any carbon that's embedded in your product will be taxed. Assuming as simple as, I'm just looking at here, my handphone, for example, assuming you export that, and there are carbon emitted in the production, delivery of the handphone or your product. And these will all, the carbon that you emit will be taxed. So if you combine the left-hand side, if you look at the left-hand side and start reducing, start to reduce the carbon, embedded carbon in your product, it just it is then just proportionally to say that you will pay less CO2 tax. Just to relate to my industry that I'm involved in, which is property development, a hidden opportunity for us is to look at green cement. It has been around for some time. The price is not that high. We are now working with consultants to start using green cement in one of our products, and in one of our projects we've already put into our contract. That is an example of how we took one little box there under green products, and worked our way through right through executing it and putting it into our contracts. So what's all this noise is all about? That is Sunita mentioned about, we are now in a climate crisis. What it's all about? And if you look in the last two, or actually it's 3 centuries, since 750 to 1750 to now, CO2 in the atmosphere has never reduced. The first brick that was laid in Subang Jaya 40 years ago, where
We worked it out together. You and I, we worked it out for this.
where where that brick, in the production of that brick, CO2 is emitted. The carbon dioxide is still in the atmosphere. So that was 40, 50 years ago. And it will be another 950 years before the CO2 of that first brick start to dissipate start to dissipate after 1,000 years. So that shows that everybody.
For this,
So that shows that everybody, be it the businesses like us, government and society, and what we do at home, plays a role for all of us to reduce our carbon footprint. And we must do it now. And if we don't, the implication will be very, very bad. So in the last 10 years, for a decade, due to climate-related events, we have lost a lot. The economic impact is 8 billion ringgit to Malaysia. Just look at the 10-year period for Ipoh. This is the heat, what do you call this? Heat sink for a heat source for Ipoh. And you can see on the left-hand side is 1998, and 10 years later, you can see that the heat island effect, apologies. So this is the heat island effect for Ipoh. And you can see that it's a lot hotter within a short period of 10 years. If I would like you to imagine is in your car, you set the temperature, your aircon temperature at 19 degrees, and suddenly you set it to 26 degrees. There will be a big difference and discomfort in those while you are in the car. So that shows 7 degrees Celsius within 10 years is very, very bad. The problem with increasing heat is
well, you, me, and Michelle can sit together. All right.
The problem with increasing heat is you get the vapor, more vapor going up to the atmosphere, and when it is hotter, somehow or rather the clouds, the awan, will actually hold the water longer. And then it gets so heavy and dense, and it will come down in a big swoosh down to the planet. And that's where you get flooding that we have seen in recent months. An aggressive prediction. I repeat the word aggressive. So there are still more studies need to be done. An aggressive prediction is the one on the right-hand side. By 2050, that's Klang, right? By 2050, the areas in red will be underwater. I repeat again, this is an aggressive prediction. I stay in Bukit Jelutong, which means I can just wear my swimming trunk, 2-3 minutes drive to Subang Jaya, and Subang Jaya is now underwater. I can swim there. So that's how serious the situation is. If we as businesses think it's a government problem and we don't play a role, that will not be right. And all of us need to play our role. And it is already here. The 4th December 2021 flood is a strong reminder that we need to get our act together now. The approach for us to do it, I'm repeating myself here, but it is so important. It is called the all of government and whole of society approach. We need to play our role to make sure that we do not contribute further to the increase in CO2 concentration in the atmosphere, be it in the way we operate, be it in the way we transport, with the way we package, the way we manufacture, and also when we go home, how do we reduce our carbon footprint at home? And with that, I would like to hand over the floor to Sharif. Now that you are clearer on the why and our role that we can play as businesses to reduce our carbon footprint, Sharif will show you how you can understand what your carbon footprint is by using tools that we have developed over the many years. Over to you, Sharif.
Thanks, Razif. Okay, I'm going to start with a short video. So the next slide shows the video. There's just you have to click on the play button, Razif. So this video has been prepared by NASA and sorry, go back. Just if you wave the cursor, you should be able to click on play.
Okay, it's not behaving.
Just try that. Try on the left, just there.
Yeah, I'm doing that now. It's not happening.
Okay, never mind.
Okay.
Maybe we can just move on. So ideal, it actually worked in our practice run, but never mind. Basically what this video does is it actually gives you a visualization of where the global average temperature has increased since 1880 to 2020. And what the result was is that actually we've already got to about 1.1, 1.2 degrees temperature increase as of the last couple of years. Apologies for my mask, but I have to wear this because it's part of our SOP in our company. When we're at the office, got to wear a mask. So I'll try, if I'm not clear enough, just raise your hand and ask me to repeat anything. Okay, so as Razif mentioned, we're going to start with guiding you on how to start the E or part of E of ESG. And more specifically, we're going to be focusing on carbon, waste, water, and recycling data baseline collection. Okay, next one. So if you think about it, you can't manage and you can't talk about what you don't measure. So when you start getting your baseline of waste, of water, of recycling, of energy use, you actually then start to develop your narrative, your story of what you are doing in terms of starting your journey in ESG. It has taken us as a company many years to actually figure out how to do it. And when we started, we also started from a zero knowledge based point of view. So on waste, just interestingly enough, it's about 1 to 200 ringgit per ton to dispose of waste to landfill if you've got additional waste that's not covered by your municipality collection. 1 ton of waste also is equivalent via the transportation and other elements of nearly 1 ton of CO2 emission. So it's almost 1 to 1. So if you can reduce your waste, increase your recycling, you're going to be having a very positive environmental impact. Water. Why are we concerned about water? Why do we want to reduce it? It's not going to save us a great deal of money in reality, but the reality is that we're getting water cuts and there's water scarcity on the horizon, especially in the context of climate change. Energy. Interestingly enough, I found this point here on the internet the other day. 600 grams of CO2 emissions is the result of 1 kilowatt hour of energy. So I've got a calculation there to say, how many kilowatt hours you need for 1 ton of CO2. So obviously reducing electric bills will reduce your operational costs. It'll also reduce your environmental impact significantly. Okay, how to start? You need to actually have a very good understanding of your business processes first. You need to assign somebody that's going to be responsible for the operational level of data collection. Then you also need someone senior in the company who will be the champion and basically be accountable for undertaking it. You need to implement data collection. Now, this is one thing that companies can fall into the trap of making pledges to reduce carbon emissions or reduce waste or reduce water or improve water optimization before they actually understand what is their baseline or their footprint. You have to start developing your footprint to understand how much water you use, how much waste you produce, how much recycling you might be doing, how much carbon emissions are you causing during your business activities. When you move on, then you can actually list some activities. When you're assessing your business, you'll actually identify areas that you think, oh, I can make improvement here or there. After you've got a baseline, then you would look at setting some reduction targets. But first of all, it's most important to measure and track and also report to your stakeholders what you are doing when you've started. And it's okay to actually say, we haven't really started yet, or we're looking at doing this, and this is where we've started, and here's where we're at now. In 2 to 5 years' time, you'll be surprised how far you can go. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so as mentioned before, the tools, this is an example here of the waste collection tool. So we've got a waste, a water, and a carbon, and a recycling data collection tool. And we've also got a compilation tool, which I'll show later. So this is just an extract from the tool. It's an Excel spreadsheet. It's been pre-populated with various figures in there. So just run you through this one. This is Acme & Co. This is their waste data for 1 month. So basically they had office waste of 213 kilograms. They had 55 kilograms of scheduled waste. In total, they had 1,993 kilograms of waste. They also had some volumetric waste. So they had 15 tons of wet waste. So when this is actually inputted into the calculator, it will actually tell you how much your CO2 emissions are from the waste that you produce and sent to landfill. And next slide. Oh, sorry, one more point on that one. And interestingly enough, that almost 2 ton of waste costs you about 285 ringgit, the estimate to actually dispose of it. So if you think about your business, there's a lot of money spent by some businesses on waste disposal. Okay, can we go forward again? So the next slide here just gives you an example, shows you basically the layout of the water data and the recycling data templates. These are very similar to what we use in our company, but they've been a little bit generalized and a little bit simplified so they can be used by any type of business and they can adapt it as they need. So they're basically what we call open source tools that have been developed, and they can be improved by other parties as well. There's no problem with that. Okay, next one. Okay. Now we get on to the more complex issue of carbon emissions. So what we're going to do is we're going to focus mostly on the energy or electricity side, but just to re-emphasize, carbon emissions are measured under scope 1, which is basically direct emissions, usually mostly from fossil fuel use and also carbon-based gases like LPG. Scope 2 is indirect emissions from purchased electricity. Now, if the purchased electricity was confirmed as being from renewable sources, then you wouldn't have carbon emissions. But because the energy grid in most countries is usually based on fossil fuel, coal power, oil power, and so on, you have a situation where there's carbon emissions. The energy you purchase for your business is actually causing carbon emissions. So that's also called scope 2. Can we go to the next one? Okay, I'm not going to dwell too much on this one. I'm just going to cover, and this is a little bit of repetitive from the last slide, but what we do as a business, and it's perfectly fine under the GHG and IPCC guidelines and protocols, is that you only measure what you can control. We have buildings that we might lease. The carbon footprint of them would be under the company that's leasing them. When we have operational control, we measure the carbon footprint. That doesn't mean to say we don't have a responsibility or a due diligence to talk to the tenant or the lessee and say, hey, what can you do about reducing your carbon emissions and your energy bill? Okay, so it doesn't mean we wash our hands, but in terms of what we report as our direct emissions or our indirect emissions, that's not part of our boundaries. Okay, can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so as mentioned before, the carbon template's a little bit more complex, but if you zoom in and you focus on the middle here, where there's the long dotted line rectangle here, this is where you put your data in. So there's data, say, for electricity use, electricity generation. So we've keyed in 128 litres in there. We've also keyed in, for heavy machinery, 254, petrol and diesel, 347. The key takeaway is that when you key the data in the center, the data or the numbers on the yellow boxes on the right-hand side automatically populate, because this has actually been embedded with formulas based on the IPCC and greenhouse gas emissions, what would we call them, emission factors. I haven't got the sheet of emission factors here, but you'll be able to see that in the toolkit if you go and get a copy of that. So down the bottom, what you have is you have 5546 is the total carbon emissions from the scope 1 and scope 2. So we keyed into scope 2. If you look in the middle down the bottom, 298 is the kilowatt hour, is the 2098, I think that is. Basically, one point there is that we've also set it up with the emissions factors for Peninsular Malaysia versus Sarawak versus Sabah. So it depends where you are in the country as to which one you fill in. Okay. I think that's about all I'll cover here. So essentially, this is a combination of scope 1 and scope 2. Basically 5.5 tons of CO2 emissions based on this scenario from 1 month from the scenario. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, another sheet in the toolkit basically allows you to compile all 12 months worth of data, and then it will automatically generate bar charts. So here we've got an example of waste and we've got recycling here. So all the data that's been put in under the waste row from 1993 through to 1780 kilograms ends up totaling to 2,288 is the waste that is generated by the company in 1 year. Also inserted the target there, and that says that basically 90% achievement if you put a target in. Now, one point to highlight, you'll only put your target for your target reduction in after you've actually got your baseline. At least 3 to 6 months is a very, very preliminary baseline. The more data points you have, the better your baseline is. In Sime Darby Property, we have restated our baseline about 4 times in 11 years since we started. As our data improves or the nature of the carbon emissions profile changes, for example, you sell assets off and then you need to restate your baseline. So there's very different, various reasons why you would restate it. So we actually get very technical though with our company. As you can tell, I'm speaking quite technically probably. The key point is that you can take a visualization from putting your data in, and you can actually use that to communicate your part of your ESG story as you're starting the journey. If you want to actually have more credibility with your data, then you would actually have third party assure your data. They would go through with you in a process and actually verify that your data is accurate to a certain point. And a lot of large companies, they do this, and we also do that. Okay, can we have the next slide, Razif? Okay, how am I going for time? I've got 10 minutes left, not too bad. Right, key takeaways from this, I hope that you've got from this, is that climate change affects us all. Also, your stakeholders are becoming interested in what you're doing in terms of ESG matters, and there'll be an expectation possibly placed on some of you, depending on the nature of your company and the size of your company and whether you export your products overseas, to do something around ESG to remain competitive, especially companies that supply other big companies. Okay, so call to action. Start with E. And just do a part of the E. You know, you could start just with waste and water, for example. If you're not sure about carbon yet or energy yet, you could easily just start with wastewater and recycling. Those are the easiest ones. Carbon's a little bit more complex, but not rocket science really. The tool has been created for you to be able to work out how to, you know, work out a basic carbon baseline based on your fuel and your electricity, for example, used in your business. Baselines, now this is the last point here, baselines are the first step. You need to understand where you are before you can say where you want to go. And coming back to an earlier point in one of the slides, if you don't measure, you cannot manage the situation. So you need the data to be able to measure where you're at now. Okay, next slide, please, Razif. Okay, so I'm not sure how many of you are very keen, but we have created some homework that we hope that you'll be able to do. I see, looking at the participant list, we've got 316 participants logged in. I'm not sure if that includes the presenters, but that's a really great number, and we're very pleased to see that number. That's excellent. So the homework here, I'll go through point by point, and then I'll elaborate if I need to on some of them. So if you like, you would start with creating an energy preliminary baseline, or you could do an energy and you could do a water baseline at the same time. The reason we've chosen these as opposed to say recycling and waste and other forms of carbon emissions is that you should have bills in your business for the last 6 months. So basically July to December 2021, if you have the bills for your water bills and your electricity bills for one site, then you can start and do this homework. So the idea is you would take the data sheet for water and for energy. You would create six versions of the file, one for each month. So you would have July file, August file, and so forth, right through to December file. And then you would basically take the kilowatt hours figure from your electricity bill, and you would plug in the number of kilowatts that you have. So this example here basically is showing 2098 kilowatts. Okay, and that basically results in 1,554.618 tons of CO2 emissions. And so this is not the full carbon footprint, but this is just to get you started and get some practice going. For water, you would be basically looking also at the water sheet, and you would be saying how many metric tons or cubic meters of water did I use, and you would put in the cubic meters data, and that would actually come out the other end, and it will tell you how much you have used. Now there's one more sheet. Sorry, there's one more sheet you'd have to fill out after that. That's the compilation sheet to actually get an idea of how much you actually have used. Okay, any other key points I've missed here? We'll be sharing a copy of these slides with you anyway, I believe. So you'll be able to see the fine detail. For example, do you fill in E62 or E63 or E64? Remember before I mentioned you need to fill in the right one in terms of where your business is based. If it's in Peninsular Malaysia, you'll fill in E62. If you're in Sarawak, it'll be E63 and so forth. And Sabah would be E64 field to fill in. Okay, next slide. I think there's one more slide. Oh, there's a couple more slides, sorry. Now, we just put together 3 or 4 slides to give you some ideas and tips on waste and water and carbon. So for waste reduction, there's a diagram at the top here. Basically, it's called the waste hierarchy. So the most preferred is prevent waste happening. Next, you would look at how, if you do have waste, can any of it be reused or repurposed? Some of your waste you also may be able to recycle, or you may be able to do some other form of recovery. The last preference is to dispose of waste to landfill. There's a lot of environmental impacts from disposing of waste to landfill, including the CO2 emissions. Also, water pollution is also a result from landfills. Even sanitary landfills can cause water pollution if they're not maintained or they get too old. So reduce waste, recycle, upcycle, and reuse. Next slide. So water, it may seem like a very basic one, but very often businesses, not only through the water network, so your water supply from Shabas, you may have within your business various pipes and fittings that are leaking. Fix them. It should be part of your general maintenance anyway. So that's one way to reduce water. Another way to reduce water, your water use, is actually to do rainwater harvesting, so you can harvest and you can store water. It's very important that you also look at your business processes and do a water audit, a water self-audit, and say, where are you now? Where can you improve? Noting that it won't save you a great deal of money, but it might save you some money on maintenance, especially if you get water damage from leaking pipes or fittings. Okay, next slide. Carbon. One area that doesn't get highlighted very often is that energy use habits can be improved. So if you do an energy use habit self-audit, you may be able to achieve 2 to 5% energy reduction just by making sure that your staff are doing best practices. For example, they set the air conditioning at the right temperature. They turn off printers and they turn off other office equipment during the weekend if your office is shut on the weekend. You make sure your lights are not left on when they're not needed and not used. Then you move over to the next part, which we've labeled M&E, or mechanical and electrical retrofitting. Very often businesses have to do some updating and some repairs of M&E in their buildings. If you're replacing a light bulb and you've got a T5 light bulb, you know, the fluorescent tube, consider replacing it with an LED tube. You can actually get LED tubes that are also there, and they will also fit the fitting, and they'll also use a lot less energy. They will have a lower carbon impact. The next one is renewable energy. Now, this one's going to cost a little bit of money, but if you've got a large enough roof space in your business, you may be able to get what they call it as a zero capex model, where you get a renewable energy supplier to come in and fit everything for free, and then you do a sharing of the energy savings. That's basically where they make their money. They make their money from you making a payment to them. So let's say you reduce your energy bill by 30%. You would need the data, obviously, for your energy profile to understand, how much it's going to be in ringgit. And then you would agree maybe you split that 70-30 or 80-20 or 60-40. It depends on the size of the project as to what the supplier will agree with. And usually it has to be a long-term arrangement too. 15 to 25 years usually for something like that. Okay, any more slides? Okay, I'm done, and I think I finished 2 minutes before the end of my given time. Okay, thank you very much, everyone.
Okay, thank you, Sharif, and thank you, Razif. I think there's some quite interesting points of view, both from the theoretical side and from the practical side. Before we get into other questions and other issues, I'm going to take some questions from the floor, which I've culled from the chat box, gentlemen. So the first one that appeared earlier was the question on the carbon market. Now, pointing out that China has a big carbon market, when is Malaysia expected to have its own carbon market?
I've got a little bit of Bursa Malaysia just did a survey recently to check with listed companies their opinions and their what they would like to see from a voluntary carbon market. So that survey is already ongoing at the moment. I believe there was also an announcement and it's under 12th Malaysia plan. Razif, you got anything to add, or any of the others got anything to add to that?
Razif, any point of view on carbon markets?
None from me, thanks.
Okay, I've got a question on carbon markets for the both of you, and this might be a little bit, a bit serious, but just in terms of the efficacy of carbon markets, because they seem to be offsetting mechanisms rather than direct, inputs into reducing carbon footprints. Do you have a point of view on whether carbon markets should be something that we should have in the long term, or whether they're more interim hybrid measures?
I would like to answer that question if the two of you don't mind. Otherwise,
yeah, please.
Yeah, sure, BK.
I will leave it. Thank you very much. So, very interesting question, Suchan. The thing about it is that the most important thing in a carbon market is verifying the robustness of that credit. And it is complex, it is not simple. Number one, is the activity actually being carried out so that carbon is being saved? Verification number one. Is the activity actually being carried out every day so the number of carbon credits produced is accurate? Is the activity being carried out every day similar to the activities on all days so that the credit is robust? That's the first step. The second step is buyers of carbon credits must pre-qualify themselves, in that if they are in an industry and they know their carbon footprint is now 100, the carbon market must set a standard for them to reduce by 10 before they can buy 20 for the first year, perhaps. This is an example. So now we got a total savings of 30. Next year, when they want to buy the credits again, when the old credits have been retired, they have to expand their 10% reduction to another 5%. And then they can buy another 15. If they want to reduce to 40%, they need to reduce their carbon footprint by 20% and buy another 20%. So it's pre-qualified situations that allow you to buy. The more you reduce, the equivalent you can buy. In some countries, they reduce the amount you can buy and insist you increase year on year. If you want to subscribe to our scheme, are you going to be in it for 5 years? Here's the entire program for you. You can commit, come in and do the thing. So check and balances, consistency, and a mechanism which will allow a sliding reduction from personal efforts to buying, offsetting, is the combination of compendium of activities that need to go simultaneously when the carbon market is launched. Thank you.
Okay, BK, thank you for that. And of course, just to repeat what Sharif was saying earlier in the chat box, basically carbon reduction should be the first priority, right? Mina Lakshana Ramada is asking also offsetting measures. What would be effective actions? What would effective actions look like? Sharif, can you answer that question, please?
Sorry, can you repeat that again?
Yeah, what about offsetting measures? What would effective offsetting look like?
Offsetting is a very, as I mentioned in the chat, it's a very broad term. You've got, like, for example, what has been mentioned already, the carbon offsets or the carbon credits. I think under the carbon market, they would call it some sort of carbon credit. Who knows what the label in Malaysia will be like? I think we'll get it. But you can do things like carbon sequestration, where you're planting trees and you're calculating the CO2 that's been sequestered from the atmosphere. But once again, when you start looking at things like offsetting, you really do need to have some third-party verification of your formulas. Or you need to be adopting formulas that are proven scientifically true. Just coming back to the point though, carbon reduction is always the best option first, because offsetting has cost, it needs verification, and there's very many different types of offsetting that I probably can't even think about myself right now. I might think about something later and think, oh, okay, there's that one too.
Yeah, okay, just one very quick more question to be taken on carbon pricing. Normazilla Marzan is actually pointing out quite correctly that in Europe, the carbon pricing has hit 75 euros per ton. That's actually quite a lot. And it's a much discussed this question within the community. Again, offsetting can and does cost a lot of money. What's your point of view on that, Sharif?
75 euro a ton. I know that Singapore has $5 Singapore dollars a ton. I think it would take some time for Southeast Asia to go up to that sort of level, but I think the journey has already started. Singapore, I think, is the first country in Southeast Asia to apply a carbon tax. So reality is that it's not going to go away, and eventually at some point in time, we're all going to be having to pay that as a tax. That's why the carbon market, we can create credits, sell or buy credits in the carbon market is also going to be an important mechanism. But coming back to reduce first is basically where we're sitting at the moment. And it's not always easy. We didn't believe that we could make carbon reduction very easily in our company. And even before the pandemic, we used to actually get an intensity reduction. In 2019, I think we got 42.5%. That's because we put a lot of effort in back then. During the pandemic, we have moved away from intensity reduction to total reduction, because as the graph that Razif showed, the CO2 levels in the atmosphere up to about 412 parts per million, it's never trended down. So we've actually taken a position where you can't just have intensity reduction. That's the easy thing. You need to actually look very seriously at the total reduction. I'm sorry if I digress too much on that.
Hsu Chuang, for me, the mindset for businesses is carbon tax will come, whether it is sooner or later. There's someone in the chat box asked about internal carbon pricing. Internal carbon pricing would be a good way for you to have a feel when carbon tax comes through or becomes reality. How will it impact your bottom line? The question was specific to Sime Darby Property. What are we doing about it? We are having conversations internally. We are still discovering how can we do internal carbon pricing. When I was having coffee with Sharif, is it so easy that we produce 6,500 tons of CO2 a year, multiply by, let's say, use Singapore's one, $5 Singapore a ton. Is that how you calculate? So we're still not so sure and going through the discovery stage. Even BK is shaking he said that's not the way to do it. But it will come. Internal carbon pricing will be the way for us to prepare.
Okay, let's stay on this thread of thought because there's quite a lot of questions coming in. So these are probably from the more advanced participants. So Shamir Mirza is actually asking, in the interim before the carbon tax mechanism comes in, and there's some certainty hopefully on that front, in the meantime, what standard reference should you use for emissions factors? Is there any alignment on this? How do we deal with this issue in terms of pricing the thing first?
Emissions factors is something that's actually specified by international bodies. So for example, 1 kilowatt of energy is about 600 grams of CO2 emissions for this part of the world. In another part of the world, it's different. So is that what the question was about, or was it slightly different question,
well,
using the word emissions factors?
Well, it's a two-part question, Sharif. It's actually, which standard reference do you use for carbon emissions factors, and whether the industry is aligned on this?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure the industry is aligned because I'm not sure many companies in Malaysia that are maybe the non-listed ones, I'm not sure many of them are doing carbon footprinting yet. The guidelines and the frameworks we use are IPCC, IPCC protocols, and we also use the greenhouse gas guidelines as well and protocols. So these are international standards developed under the Paris Agreement and the group of scientists that basically advise there. And we also update our emissions factors every year for our carbon footprint, because sometimes the emission factor calculation will be updated based on, say, a change in the local economy's way of generating their electricity, for example.
Okay, we're going to take a couple more questions from the more advanced participants on this. So in the meantime, someone also asking whether there's a requirement or whether there's a compulsion for corporates to also calculate other greenhouse gas emissions, and NO2, for example, SO4, for example. Should companies be measuring these as well?
In an ideal world, yes, but let's take diesel. When we put diesel into our formulas, it's actually taking into account those other chemicals that are actually in the diesel. It's part of the formulas that we get from the IPCC guidelines and protocols, or GHG. But if you've got a business that specifically is emitting that gas as part of the business process, then yes, ideally. We're not really the technical subject experts. We've just had a bit of practice in-house. We started our journey off back in 2009 when we started developing our first baseline, and we started our first carbon footprint in 2010. We had PwC guide us through that process back then. So you need, I think if you're really serious about it, you need to get the subject expertise and where you've got the data, the scientists involved in the process.
Okay, one more question on the carbon tax, right? Because obviously, as a big Malaysian conglomerate with a regional footprint, you might have better visibility on the policies and the carbon tax introduction. Someone is asking, actually, Sean Ahmad Hisham is asking, what is your feedback to participants in terms of when the carbon tax will be introduced? Because I think in the 12th Malaysia plan, it was announced as far back as 2021.
I'm going to say something. My gut feeling is somewhere between the next 2 to 5 years, but I think Razif, you probably want to chime in, and maybe BK as well. It's like crystal ball gazing almost sometimes with policy. Not saying that they've got it wrong, but sometimes it takes some time to get these things in.
Okay, Sean Aoyang, sorry, BK.
Sorry, Hsu Chuang. I just wanted to add that carbon tax is a stick, carbon credit is a carrot. And so the government would be wise, and they've taken a lot of inputs from industry, from the Malaysian Green Building Council as well, to slide from carrot into stick. You notice Singapore being Singapore, they've gone on stick first. So it's okay, it probably works for them being an island nation and in complete control of every movement of every citizen. But for us, there must be a transformation period, which is the best easing in sort of into from carrot to stick. Thank you.
Okay, that's interesting. Any thoughts on which sectors Malaysia should focus on? Power, oil and gas, or agriculture? Sean Aoyang is referencing this in the context of China's ETS, starting with the power sector.
Part of the there's what we call the CEO Action Network, consisting of 40 companies, and the members are the individual CEOs, and it's a collaboration with CGM. So they've identified 5 top sectors that we should focus on. Oil and gas is of course at the top. Property development is another one, and there are another 2 or 3 that doesn't come to my mind yet. What were the other? Plantation. I think even the communication sector as well. So 4 or 5 top ones that have been identified, and this is the focus areas for us to reduce our carbon footprint. But my thinking is, while these 4 or 5 are important sectors, it is still a whole of society need to do their part.
Okay, so which then begs the question, and this is being asked of by Nomazila Mazan, who likes Razif's statement of the One Nation approach. So what is the list of initiatives by ministries and other agencies, so that people and corporations know who to talk to and how to align efforts with that of government? To start this ball rolling, who should they talk to?
Datin Sri Sunita would be the best to do that, as she interacts a lot with the government. During a series of, I will attempt, Hsu Chuang. We had a series of engagement with the government last year, and the energy sector did one, property development, etc., etc. And we were surprised as we were collating the feedback and and during the roundtables on the kind of incentive or disincentive that the government has, but in a way, it's a little bit all over the place. And we need to continue that conversation so that we are clear of what's out there that we can take advantage of as companies, and what's in the horizon. And it's a lot of information. Conversations are continuing into round 2, and I do look forward of the outcome. It is a learning process for everyone to align. It is a very short question by Nomazila, but it is a fairly complex one. Not sure if Datin Sri Sunita is on, if she could give some perspective, as she sees the overall interaction of the other sectors as well.
Hi, everyone. I don't want to distract too much from the important sustainability journey, but I'm going to share in the chat box that we are working very closely with the CEO Action Network. And this is a private sector initiative to work with all of government, whole of society. So we've reached out to the key ministries. We're doing this again this year. We've got a report of proceedings that's going to be launched on Earth Day this year. So I'll share the link with you, and please be involved. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, Sri.
Okay, gentlemen, Marwan Saleh asking whether there's any standard formula to calculate the emissions factors for water, energy, and waste.
So if I may quickly take this question, gentlemen, because I wanted to make a clarification. Also, Hafiz Hishamuddin asked quite a similar question on the chat box, not the Q&A side. Emissions factors are something that has to be authority endorsed. We can't create these factors on our own and use them. Well, we could internally, but it may not receive a lot of credibility acceptance from the people who told you that it's 600. How did this 600 grams per kilowatt hour come into being? Only when there are bodies like the Energy Commission or SEDA endorsing it, because we know the exact process of how much coal and how much oil goes into the mix. We have produced this emissions factor. We use it. But whenever we use any third-party endorsed emission factors, we state where this emission factor comes from and transfer the credibility of this factor to the party who has published it. In Malaysia, there is a dire need for more robust and more complete. Very few sectors have got emission factors announced, and we need this to expand, and it will. When the carbon market comes in force, the government, the operators of the market may say that this year we are allowing waste from agriculture base and from fossil fuel based carbon credits to be traded on the market. Next year, we may allow used oils, which are being converted into biodiesel, carbon credits, to be traded. So they'll open sectors based on which the hotspots are, based on what NDCs we've committed at the COP, and based on what projection of towards net zero we have committed to in 2005, and to reach that goal, the hotspots will be identified and the carbon credits will be named. Thank you.
Okay. Shamir asking as well whether Sime Darby has taken the initiative to lobby the government to provide grant sponsorship, things like tax breaks, direct sponsors, to further encourage reduction through innovation. This was similar to what Norway, the Norwegian fund, did previously. I think we previously obtained a $10 million grant as a proof of case study. So that's something that maybe is specific to you guys. Have you, have you spoken to the government about this? What's the progress? Things like that.
So we, as I shared earlier, there are a lot of opportunities out there that we are looking at, to the extent that we are also hiring a new role. It's an innovation manager that will be joining us soon. To the specific questions, whether we lobby the government to provide sponsorship, tax breaks, etc., we do it via the earlier roundtables of the CEO Action Network and CGM. Do we do it direct? No. If there are any lobbying to be done, the property developers tend to go through RADAR rather than going through the government direct. RADAR is the Real Estate Housing Development Association.
And what's the progress on that front? Because there seem to be multiple platforms on which you are talking to the government.
So the key platform that our key arrowhead is the CEO Action Network and CGM, and we're moving to round 2 for 2022, and it's an ongoing conversation, Khoo Chuang, with the government. So the first round, I feel it was like, this is my own personal takeaway, was building, starting that conversation. Could maybe even saying it's a bit of an icebreaker, and we can see that they are opening up more on what's available out there, what their concerns are, and maybe in 2022, as we go into round table 2, a little bit more alignment with the industry.
Yeah, so Razif, as per your slides, which discusses things like the flooding, and maybe you're having to wear a swimsuit to swim in Subang just down the road, we don't have a lot of time left. Immediacy is the proper thing, right? And we can't wait for government to pull their fingers out. Going back to one of your slides, and basically the fact that supply chains and being accessible to supply chains, which is where emissions are 90% of which come from. In terms of feedback, right? How immediate, how important is it now for companies to be part of the global supply chain, adhering to ESG principles? How hot is the fire now?
It is. How can I say this? Okay, so let me take one step back. We went back to our 2000 vendors and we asked them a simple survey. Where are you right now in terms of ESG journey? And not to our surprise, we were not surprised of the result. 92% of them said that we're still grappling in the dark on what it is all about. These are generally small to medium enterprises. And the 8% are fairly large organization. And we have, I think, one or two companies who deal with Europe, and they're on the ball. They sort of know what needs to be done. Of course, it is still a journey. So the SME, are they in a boiling wok? I think they should feel that the heat is coming. It is not yet boiling, but it will come. For example, the 2026 CBAM when it kicks in. And we are also looking at, by 2025, a consideration whether you're in the bus or you're not in the bus. I think if I were to steal Datin Sri Sunita's word, is excluded from the supply chain if you can't prove us evidence. And that's evidence that you are committed to the ESG. So the supply chain need to wake up now. The challenge, I think, for the supply chain is, what do I do next? And hence this sustainability journey series hopefully will start to open up their eyes and look at the risks and opportunities going forward. And at least there is a source for them to come back to. How, if you just look at the three of us, right? Sharif, Razif, and BK, and even Datin Sri Sunita, an opportunity for them to come to resources for them to move forward. Sorry, it's a bit of a long answer to your short question.
Okay, so again, referencing your slides, Razif, you talked about how, or I think this is Sharif's slides, measurement is a starting point because you can't manage your ESG without first measuring it, right? So how do you guys do it? And obviously you're going to answer the context of a big company, right? But just for the smaller guys, right? What kind of resources are needed? How can small firms do this? You know, without having more cash burn. Cash burn is a big no-no now, right?
Well, at least they can offset their expenses by the savings they might achieve in their supply chain processes. So quite simply, I would come back to what I mentioned earlier, start on electricity and waste and recycling. So electricity, because you're going to save money. So if you're spending a little bit of money, let's say you have to hire someone to track and monitor and help develop your baseline, and maybe start to implement. This is the next thing. Once you have your baseline, then you have to figure out what you're going to do. What activities or initiatives are you going to do to make improvements? Reducing your carbon. Also, at the same time, you're reducing your operational expenditure. For electricity, one of the most simple things, even before you got your baseline, go around your office, go around your factory, go around your company and see, are people wasting energy? You can do that even before you do your baseline. You can say, you can go around and identify, hey, my electricity bill was 2,500 last month. I want to bring it down to 2,000. Is it because my staff don't care about whether or not they're wasting electricity because it's not their electricity?
Okay, so this is essentially things like the company owner, right? Just walking the factory floor, going from table to table, workstation to workstation. But the thing is, the company owner is going to say, well, that wouldn't be the most cost-effective use of his time.
Yep.
So, you know, it's basically getting the engine into gear. And just in terms of the templates and the using of the templates, not just on a 1 or 2 day basis, but on a sustained front. So you got some data analysis, you know, that can take place. You know, that call to action, gentlemen, you know, it's easy to say, and it's easy to reference the slides and the big floods and all these things, right? But just getting the engine into gear. Where's the low-hanging fruit?
For a smaller medium enterprises, it has to start from the top. That means the tauke really need to be on the ball to understand that, but he or she may not understand the technicalities behind it, but the intent. I think one of my slides in a small box, it is the mindset. And the mindset has to start from the owner himself or herself. And then how do we start? Assuming that you are not lucky enough that that mindset or it's not happening, but you strongly believe in it as a practitioner, you can start with the templates that we're going to provide, those tools that we can are going to provide, and have a small team to look at like Sharif mentioned, your electricity reduction. There are many ways for you to use. There are many ways that you can use the template, but the templates, in my opinion, if it's brought to, if it is discussed, somebody holding it and discussing it, then you start to find opportunities. Sime Darby Property owns two golf clubs. One of them is KLGCC. KLGCC is a little bit like a SME. It has I don't know what those air conditioning system is called, but it has all these pipelines that has heat, and then make sure that the heat doesn't get out. So you wrap it with that air conditioning foam, and you reduce the energy usage. Very, very simple things. And the starting point where the action started was the template, right? It encourages that discussion. So where do we find this reduction? Do we put this 50-cent air conditioning foam around it? Would we get the result? And they did get the result. So to your specific to your question, the template can generate the action. It will be a lot easier if the Tauke is in the conversation. He or she is aware and gives the practitioners the authority to do it, and that changes the mindset.
Yeah. Earlier, both of you talked about this carrot and stick approach, right? And I think Eng Kiat in the Q&A is rightly pointing out the top three things that small companies can adopt, right? So you talk about the Tauke getting involved, but maybe it also can be linked to individual employee performance. Should, for example, a bonus or an increment or some kind of performance reward be linked to one's footprint within the organization, because it does save the business costs, energy costs, time costs, repair costs, refurbishment costs, things like that. Can that be implemented? Is there even a business case to do it?
May I, gentlemen?
Yeah.
A very short answer. All these centuries from 1750, when oil and gas came into being, we never considered the cost of the environment. It was always free for us, and look where it got us to. We are in the middle of a climate crisis. So this word about reducing cost and rewarding has to take a holistic point of view. Secondly, the government is coming up with the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Act, and they will come up with many acts which will ask you to push your borders in compliance. So if you don't start getting savvy now, you will have to go through a crash course. The choice is yours. Thank you.
Yeah, that's interesting. That is quite a radical approach. And some might say from a company as big as Sime Darby Property, which does own two golf courses, golf courses take a lot of land and at the expense of other things, perhaps from an opportunity cost front. If you want to lead by example, there could be a lot of possibilities on that front. Just in terms of also the larger business ecosystem that you manage, a lot of suppliers to your ecosystem. Are those conversations taking place within the organization?
Yes, for the golf club, right? We clear an area. There's a lot of fertilizers that we use. It's just a land with very few people, very few inverted commas, privileged people using them. And what can we do? How can we contribute to a better planet? And what we do is we have a playbook. We call it it's actually safety and sustainability playbook, but let's keep to the topic of sustainability. The playbook ensures that any operations that we have, be it at our golf club or at our development, everybody follow a certain set rules. So to your question on the conversation, so the conversation starting to happen around what kind of species do we have around our golf club? And then they say, we're not so we need a little bit of help. And then the golf club then is now hiring an arborist for him, I think, who'll be joining us soon to help look at the species that we have. How can we encourage more biodiversity? We have a mall as well, KLE Mall, where they are leading our organization and teaching us on how to do food waste. And we want to replicate that food waste that they do, which turns into, I think, into fertilizer or food, animal feed. And we want to do the same for our golf club as well. So yes, conversations are happening, but conversations are not enough until you have a clear plan. In our case, our plan is the playbook. Every business, be it the golf club, malls, or property development, has to comply to the playbook to make sure that everybody knows what the standards are and implement them.
Okay, before we wrap up, I just want to ask Sharif something, because the templates that you provided are quite useful, but do they require someone of training or experience to fill them in and to manage them on a day-to-day basis? Can anybody do it? Can even interns do it, just to get the ball rolling?
That's why I come back to the point that start on the water and waste template. When you become competent on that, then move into the carbon one. But if you feel that you've got fairly good understanding of basic mathematics, you can read an electricity bill, you can measure how much fuel you're using, then by all means also start the carbon one. So in short, you just need to start.
Yeah, and we're going to have a coaching session on the templates. 1, 2, 3, 4, the fifth module. I can't exactly remember the date, but the fifth module, no, the sixth module will be training people on the use of the template. So my encouragement is use the templates now. Doesn't matter whether you're an interim or an engineer, and start using it. And if you're stuck, bring those questions to the coaching session. We got 2 coaching sessions. Coaching session number 1 is for this particular template, and put it on the table, and the other participants can also benefit from the questions or the struggles that you have.
Okay, gentlemen. Well, Razif, Sharif, BK, thank you for being so sporting and for taking all the questions, including from me.
Some great questions.
Yeah, I'd like to summarize before I pass it back to Datin Sri. 3 key points for me. Firstly, doing business effectively and profitably in the 21st century equates to compliance at some level to at least one or all of the needs of the environment, social or governance ecosystems in which we operate. Secondly, it's a collective effort. Governments and societies need to join the business sector to address climate issues. And thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, in the context of getting started, to begin achieving our own ESG ambitions, as Razif was saying, one must first begin measuring our activity, whether it's on the resource usage, carbon emissions, or even waste disposal. Hence this journey, which for many of us, including myself, can and should begin today. Okay, that's it from me. Thanks everybody again for coming, and back to you, Datin Sri.
Thank you so much, Chuang. Thank you, everybody. This has been a great session, and we hope all the attendees found today's sessions useful in getting yourself set up on your learning journey. I'm so sorry about the online community. Almost 200 people have already signed up, but for some reason, some people are still struggling to get in. We will work this out and we will get you in. So now you've understood why you need to get started on your sustainability journey, and urgently. I also appreciated the enthusiasm in wanting to speak to the government. You're most welcome to be part of the roundtable sessions. Do reach out to CGM to see how you can play a more active role. Meanwhile, we've learned that baselines are the first steps. You need to know where you are before you can plan for where you want to go, and you cannot manage what you're not measuring. Thank you very much, Razif, Sharif, BK, for your insightful sharing today. A big thanks to Chuang for enhancing our learning with your fabulous moderation as always. As you leave the webinar today, you'll be presented with a survey. Please do give us your feedback so that we can understand how we can improve on the sessions as we're going on. And for all attendees, do download the Sustainability Toolkit. This is available at your online community, and we will send you emails with this as well, and use it to start measuring your baseline usage. So there is a group forum on the CGM website so that you can interact with each other and with the facilitators, share your experience, post questions, learn from each other. We'll be posting all the materials and the recording, and you will get a link in your reminder email as well. So see you back here, same time next week. Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.